Hi folks, Scott Broberg, president of SBR Financial Group. Today I am going to do something to the effect of a PS, postscript, to a video that we did on the Laffer Curve. You'll have to go back and watch that video to understand the full idea behind the Laffer Curve. But there's something that happened recently in the world that directly relates to this. And so it's good to get real world information regarding an economic principle. So in just a short review, essentially, if the government wants to raise revenue coming into the Treasury, so they want this amount of revenue to go up, there are a couple different ways that you can try to do that. You could try to get more people working, which raises the amount of incomes that are being produced that are taxed. Or you could raise the tax rate. Okay? And so this idea, the Laffer curve, says, well, let's look at what happens when you raise that tax rate. And you have to start with this idea that if you have a tax rate of 0, right, you collect 0 money because none of it is taxed to come in. But at the same time, we note over here that if you have a tax rate of 100%, you also collect 0. Because who's going to go to work and have 100% of their money go into the federal treasury? Nobody's going to do that. So we know that that's 0. What we do see is that when you begin to raise the tax rates, that the dollar amounts going into the treasury start to increase. So we know that they begin this upward trajectory like that. But at the same time, we know that there's got to be a downward trajectory because it comes back to this 0 point at 100%. Now begins the argument. Where on this graph does the downward begin? At what point would you say, look, if we increase the rate by 1 percentage point more, we actually bring in less money to the treasury, either because we're disrupting economic growth and so jobs are lost and so revenue decreases, or people begin to do things to avoid the tax. Okay? So some people will argue that, well, the peak is somewhere in the 30% range. Right? So if you're taxing here at the peak, say 30%, you move it to 40%, there's no reason to do that because you already start that downward trend. Other people say, no, it's way out here in the 80s, 70s to 80s, that you can keep getting increase in revenue all the way out to here, and then you get the steep drop off that would happen to 100%. Who's right? Well, there's so many variables that go into picking one tax rate. Watch the videos because we do talk about if you pick a tax rate that's higher but then provide some kind of loophole or deduction, well, then you might not end up with any difference in tax being paid. So there's a lot of variables, but there is one thing that happened this year that directly comes into this idea of the Laffer curve. That's what I want to point out. So let me give you a little bit of history. In 2012, the last election cycle that we had, presidential election cycle, France had a presidential election cycle. And they elected a president named François Hollande. And one of the very first things he did was he instituted a 75% tax bracket, 75% tax rate on anybody earning income greater than 1 million euros. I have to figure out how to draw a little euro here. Okay. So anything over 1 million euros was going to be taxed at 75%. Now what they did though is when they passed this, they put an expiration on the tax because if it didn't work out, they were just going to let this thing expire on its own without anybody having to vote on the expiration happening. Well, that happened in this past January 1st. So December 31st of 2014, January 1st of 2015 comes around, and this 75% tax rate expired. Well, guess what? They let it expire. Why? Because you started having people change their behavior at 75% tax rate. People began to balk, and they began to say no. So there's a couple things that they did. One is they began to move. One of them, there was a famous movie star who essentially said, I'm picking up my house where I live and I'm moving it to Belgium, not more than a couple miles across the border. But all he wanted to do was avoid this 75% tax rate. One of the things that, one of the outcries came from soccer players. So, of course, the international soccer leagues are bigger than all of our sports here in the United States, and there's some high-earning soccer players, and they threatened to go on strike over the rate. So what you saw was people starting to move or balk about coming to France. Business started to decline. Economic growth has been very low. And it just did not bring in the money to the Treasury that they thought that it would, and it was causing a lot of problems with human behavior. So one thing we always have to remember, in any economic model, there are human beings, and all of us, no matter what your political leanings are, tend to not like to pay taxes. We always assume that we can make some other guy pay them. But if they go up on that other guy, will eventually begin to change his behavior or do something different. Another thing that companies started to do was what they called deferred comp. And essentially they were hoping that, hey, we're just going to defer the compensation on our executives in hope that this thing expires so that eventually we can pay them and they'll get the larger dollar amount taxed at a lower rate. So just a little bit of economic theory in action, thanks to I didn't even spell France right. I forgot the N. Thanks to France. One of the economic ministers over in France said that if you put in this super tax, it was going to turn France into Cuba without sunshine. A place where you would never get high earning people because they would always be trying to avoid this tax. So folks, these models do explain a lot in economic terms, and this is just one great example that just came to fruition for us to look at. If you wanted to read more about this, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about this. You could probably type in France super tax expiration, something like that into Google, and you'll probably get the Wall Street Journal article explaining more about it. So folks, for more videos on your personal finances or just economic ideas, check out our YouTube page, SBR Financial Group. You can also go to sbrfinancialgroup.com for more of your personal finance needs. Until next time, we'll see you next time on the video.